welcome all, those who have escaped the exams. So you're glad that you are here. So we host today Odile Renaud-Basso. Odile, welcome to the Robert Schuman Center, European University Institute, the EMU Lab. So let me say a few words to start with. Then Odile will take the floor for some initial remarks. And we're going to experiment a bit a format that is a bit different than the classic lecture. We are going to, after the initial remarks by Odile, we are going to have a conversation, the two of us. Then we open the floor. Then Giancarlo will draw some conclusions at the end. Now, Odile is so president of the EBRD, so European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is a quite extraordinary animal in the institutional panorama that we have worldwide. I recall just then maybe Odile can add or subtract what I say. I mean, it was established back in 1991, and it showed actually at the time how crises motivate speed, because President Mitterrand came up with the idea of creating such an institution back in October '89, and 18 months later it was actually inaugurated. So it was a quite extraordinary speed, given how we work in Europe and worldwide. And it has 75 countries, shareholders, and that is also a novelty. I mean, 2 European institutions. So the European Union, so the European Commission is there representing the Union, and the European Investment Bank. And it is actually the only multilateral development bank worldwide where the European countries have actually a majority. So 54%. I recall that the US has about 10% of the. So it's in a sense it's quite an original construction. And given the fragmentation that we see worldwide, the developments, etc., so looking at our policy, economic challenges through the eyes of this institution, I think is interesting also to learn how to cooperation can be established or can be revived. So internal, external fragmentation. So this is what we are going to talk about today. As to Odile, so she's president of EBRD since I think October 2020. She's the 7th president of the bank, and she has a curriculum that is quite I want to say unique, because nobody is unique, but or we are all unique in a different sense. But okay, but if you take the experience in France, so before becoming president of BRD, head of the Treasury, but also the Caisse de Dépôt before. Then you had a spell when we worked directly together in Brussels at the European Commission for 5 years, actually. So, and I'm particularly glad also personally that you have accepted to come over. And in Brussels also, you were with Herman Van Rompuy as Deputy Chief of Staff. So that was the period 2010, 2012, if I'm not mistaken. So, and everything happened at that, at that time. So you recall, you stayed I think 2012. So take I look at George, the first Grexit crisis, then the sovereign debt crisis, until EFSF, ESM establishment at that time, then until whatever it takes. So it was really a concentrated period of big moves and big risks. So you come in, and I think here you can bring the perspective clearly of of your present job, but also we are going to push you a bit also on your past experience, where you come from. You talk there maybe on a more personal in your personal capacity, but I think it would be good to us and to us, as a contribution to the EMU Lab. EMU Lab, just one word before ending. We are up and running. So it is the initiative by Giancarlo Corsetti, Pierre Werner Chair, and myself, Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa Chair. We are organizing, many events, and the aim is to publish by the end of the year what we have dubbed the Florence Report, and a provisional title being Reconfiguring Europe, Policy Space and Fragmentation, which is, I think, at the heart of the issues we discussed today. When we started the project, we thought about fragmentation more of an internal issue within the EU, then fragmentation big time now also on the external side. Just as a little announcement, this is the French month actually of the EMU Lab, because we are going to have François Villeroy de Galhau, who is the governor of the Central Bank of France, on the 19th of June. So those who are here are warmly invited to attend as well. So this is what I wanted to say. Odile, you have the floor, and then we have a little conversation, and then we open more large.
Thank you very much, Marco, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to come to this wonderful place, and it's an honor to speak at the European University Institute and the EMU Lab. And indeed, as you highlighted, I think I will bring my experience, very operational experience of a multilateral development bank, which is working both in EU countries, but also outside in the European neighborhood, and where this question of fragmentation is really, challenging us, because we see that, as you were saying, within the EU, but also and in EU policies, but also in the activities we are developing and the way we work in other countries. So I will come back to that. And it's always, when you managing an institution which is very operational, focused, making loans and project, it's, coming here is a very good opportunity to step back and reflect on what is the scale of the events we are facing and the scale of risk. And I think that also looking back a bit at the history of Tuscany, with the rivalry between Florence and Siena, the continuous war in the Middle Age, and already back then pandemics, early forms of economic sanction, with the Pope taking measures against Siena merchants. This reminds us that fragmentation was part of, is part of our history. Risks have always existed, but also can be in a way addressed. So as a matter of introduction, I wanted just to, and before, to come to contemporary fragmentation risk, I wanted to discuss today. I want to bring 4 very recent dates. The first one is 1991, then 2022, 2020, 2022, 2025. 1991, so you mentioned it, this was the year where the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development was established. It was the collapse of Soviet Union. And the aim of the bank founders was to build a new post-Cold War era in Central and Eastern Europe. Economic prosperity was seen as essential to ensure long-lasting peace on the continent. So it was the impression that we are entering a new era, end of Cold War, developing market economies and democracy in post-Soviet Union countries were at the core of the mandate of the bank, and it was seen as a sort of completely new world. And our mandate was to focus on private sector development and really transitioning economies, communist, centralized economies to open market economies. And this was really the idea behind the bank. It was why it was created so quickly and so forth, but really to help this transition. This was also the time where you had Fukuyama's thesis on the end of history, which has been widely discussed and overinterpreted probably. But what we can say now clearly is that 1991 was not the end of history, nor the start of final domination of liberal democracies. So then 30 years later, 2020, this year marked, we all know that the global eruption of COVID pandemic, international borders were shut down, global supply chain was seriously disrupted. And I think this is the time where we realized that, the issue of security of supply could become a major concern. Countries were openly competing for consignment of much needed equipment, such as medical masks and later vaccines. So entry into a different world in a way. Coronavirus was defeated by the vaccines, but the story continues. 2022, full-scale war is back in European continent at the heart of EBRD's historical countries of operation. So the war on Ukraine, launched by Russia, is not an isolated moment in time. I think it started, we know that it started clearly before, including the annexion of Crimea and the destabilization of Donbass in 2014. But 2022 is a true turning point in terms of the scale of the effects and the challenges posed to Europe and to the world by this war. 2025 now, so I think that it's a new page also in terms of economic globalization as we knew it, with all its limits and flaws and externalities, but this economic globalization which rested on the promotion of international trade, reduction of barriers and tariffs, and a set of common rules, including for settling dispute. I think this is really deeply challenged. It started also before. I think Trump 1 already brought a number of increase of tariff and so forth, but I think the scale of the challenge now is of a different nature. And we are confronted with new approach to tariffs. We don't know yet the extent of the new tariff. The volatility is absolutely extreme. We don't know if and when they will apply, whether the US courts will stop them, what will be the economic consequences. We know that the de facto embargo between the US and China has for now been avoided, but the threat of trade wars persist and uncertainties born of that risk will not go away. So I think we will live with that challenge for long. And it's not, of course, the US shift is massive, but this has also a lot of repercussion on how others, and in particular the EU, thinks about trade, globalization, and so forth. And with this background, we still have to cope with, a number of challenges, such as stagnant economic growth, urgent need to address the climate change, which I believe is probably the largest crisis for humanity, address demographic pressures, and we intervene in a number of countries where demography is really shrinking, and on the other hand, you have countries with, migration pressure and a very dynamic migration, which cause imbalances difficult to manage. And on top of that, new challenges coming, the need to scale up defense, enhance energy security, and strengthen supply chain resilience. So, but the bulk of the conversation, we will have a lot of time for the conversation, and I think that should be the core of the conference, but just I would just like to briefly introduce two reflections. One on the nature of the risk, and the other one on how to address them at different levels. So on the nature of the risk, global and domestic risk of fragmentation, I think, this is a reality that we have this risk both at the global level and at regional level. At the global level, I think that the reasons for the trends towards fragmentation are quite complex. On the political side, the creation of international institutions such as the UN or Bretton Woods institution after World War II did not just embody an ideal and a hope for humanity, it also facilitated important outcomes, including on poverty reduction. But the multilateral system as a whole has been very heavily criticized for not being able to prevent or stop some of the bloodiest conflict. And we see that now in Ukraine, in Gaza. It has also been attacked for not providing a powerful and quick answer to some of the fiercest challenge, such as climate, biodiversity, and other global public goods. So that's for the political side. On the economic side, since World War II, the big trend has been the drive for greater economic integration, and this reflected the lessons from the interwar period. The Bretton Woods institutions were established to help manage the global economy and reduce barriers to trade. But now this model of globalization is clearly deeply challenged, increasingly challenged. When you look from a North-South perspective, globalization has raised living standards globally in aggregate, and it took out a lot of people out of poverty, but it has also increasingly created inequality within and amongst countries, which is one factor for migration and instability. In the more developed countries, criticism of the model of free and open trade has been growing against the backdrop of industrial and job market crisis. This is clear in the US. It's also clear in some European countries, a number of European countries. And the question now raised are whether we were right to assume in a more open and liberal global economy that economic players would be generally interested in fair competition, and there would be no, play around fair competition. And did we underestimate how free riding and uncooperative behaviors could deter the objectives and benefits of multilateralism? These fragmentation trends are not new. I think they've been at work for quite long, but they have been particularly amplified in recent years and maybe recent months. And I think all the discussion and debate and conflict around tariff is one clear illustration of that division and that challenge. The main threat, as I see it, is that global fragmentation risks undoing decades of development gains, and it weakens the global common priorities of maintaining international order, financial stability, and combating climate change. So the cost of undoing that could be huge. Of course, from international organization, it also represents profound challenge because the mission of the bank of institutions like us is really to bridge divides and foster cooperation. So what do we do in such an environment? So that's for the global challenge. When you look more at the European level, I think that we see same sort of trends, in a way. The Brexit is a good example of that. It reflects that, and it showed the fact that in a number of cases in Europe, fragmentation is not perceived as a risk, but as an opportunity, a desirable horizon, even an attractive model. I think in the UK, the mood have shifted somewhat, but still you see this trend at work in Europe, with the challenges related to the fact that growth is plateauing, debt levels are quite on the rise, social challenges are facing a number of countries, and so many challenge the benefits of globalization. We see the rise of populism, and I think that the positioning towards Ukraine and Russia are one symptom of that, one symptom of the divide across the European continent, including between the European member states. It was quite striking in the night of May to see some countries attending the May 9th parade in the Red Square, while others were celebrating the European Day at the EU level. So I think Europe, in a way, we could say that previously in the past in a number of occasions, but still today, I think it's very relevant to say that Europe stands at a crossroad. And if we still have Eurosceptic forces continuing to rise, this could undermine cohesion and cooperation within Europe. And we've seen the results of the election recently in Romania and Poland, and we see how close the situation, I mean, the frictions, I mean, how important the friction are and the divide is. So this could mean for Europe, at minimum, limited progress for the status quo, or from the status quo, or even rolling back some of European achievements. I think it would be too simplistic to say that populist parties are the sole factor responsible for driving fragmentation and objectives that are fundamentally off track with European values. And the question goes beyond the positioning of some political parties and political discussion. We must face the fact that there are more systemic aspirations across European countries for stronger, more resilient, maybe more protected society, and there are two different avenues in front of us. Some seeing fragmentation as a solution, but in my view, it's unlikely that more fragmented and unifying societies will constitute a protection from global turbulence, or the alternative is developing a new collective ambition. So in this global environment, I think we have two key questions to face. First of all, is Europe still relevant, and is multilateralism still relevant? My personal answer, and building on my experience, is that clearly yes on both. And maybe I will just draw out a few, areas why I see that as clearly relevant. I think to avoid the emergence of two Europe and to avoid divergences, we need to create a new dynamics and to work on core priorities for deeper EU integration. The first one is to focus on the continent's security. I think it's an issue which has been put on the back, was not at the core, at the forefront of the priorities. I think it's coming back, rightly so, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. The second one is improving the EU's competitiveness, and in particular, this calls in particular for fostering European industrial and innovation capacity, which is closely related to deepening capital markets. And third, I would say pursuing the green agenda as a source of comparative advantage. And I think in this same room, Paolo Gentiloni framed the problem of Europe being reliant on US for defense, China for supply chains, and Russia for energy. And I think this is a circle we need to get out of in the priorities and the years to come. And I think the shock of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has revealed two insights about Europe. The first one is the ability to react rapidly and to innovate. And I think that we should never underestimate and be too negative about Europe's capacity to address, urgent issues in an efficient manner, because I think that the reaction to the war on Ukraine, providing support to the country, getting the political support to implement sanctions, and so forth, is quite amazing, and we see that in other crises before. But on the other hand, the general vulnerability of Europe has also been more obvious and more visible. And here, I think the issue is not so much Europe, but it's rather the lack of Europe. And the new debate it has triggered on common security, defense policy, how to ensure that Europe is able to protect itself is overdue probably, and it needs to get traction and get answers. But overall, my personal conviction is that the world fragmentation we are facing and the logic of superpower we are confronted with on the one hand, US, on the other side, Russia, it means that the European level is, to be relevant, we need to work at the European level, and countries individually, European countries individually cannot address, themselves on their own, cannot wait on the world stage at the national level. So European level is a relevant level to deal with the challenges we face currently at the global level. And just to finish on my introductory remark on the role of MDBs in that context. So I mentioned the role of Europe. I think the role of MDBs is of very different nature, but is also very relevant. There is a sort of a paradox because we see increasingly global problems, transnational problems, issues like climate change, financial stability, and so forth are issues that need to be addressed at the global level. Yet the trust and the faith in shared solution, common approach is weakening. And that's why multilateral institutions are important, and that's in a way what they need to deliver and to make the link between global solution to address global problems. I think there has been a lot of focus in the last few years about the role of multilateral development banks as an instrument to leverage finance and to, in a context where support for development finance, budgetary capacities are limited, the appetite from countries, shareholders to leverage MDB capital to finance global common goods, development and so forth is even more important. But but of course it's also more challenging when you have shareholders who are very divided and do not see solution as the same as a common view on the solutions needed. But still, I believe that when views are so divided and the challenges on globalization are so important, having institutions which bring together these different views around the table and so forth is the best way forward to find relevant solutions. And in that sense, EBRD is an interesting institution because being at the same time multilateral with US, Japan, China as a very small shareholder, but Canada, G7 as a majority also, and European countries have a majority, and we have EU institutions. So we are very close to the EU and European institution, but also being able to bring non-EU countries on, to focus and to support our agenda. To address the current very rapidly evolving environment, I think that we adjust our model. For example, focusing more on diversifying of supply chain rather than, taking into account the challenges around globalization, security, and supply. So focus a lot on regional integration. Focus a lot on global public goods. For us, climate supporting green transition has been an important priority, and see how we can leverage on our balance sheet to bring, not only because we finance the private sector directly, but also to bring private investors investing alongside with us in project, in investment in the countries in which we invest. So really mobilizing private capital to support development priorities and contributing to stabilities in the region in which we work. Just a last point on our, the impact of geopolitics on our activity. We are working in a number of post-Soviet countries and a number of countries which are really at the forefront of the confrontation between the different blocs. Central Asia, very close to China, Russia, but also very important for the EU in terms of access to raw material and so forth. And these are countries which are willing to diversify and not be overly, to work with all possible partnership, but also the Caucasus. Of course, Ukraine is a key country of investment for us, but we also now invest in North Mediterranean, and we see this confrontation of influence and the role of MDBs to bring support and standards in enhancing the economic growth and development capacities of these countries. I will stop here. Okay, so that we have time to discuss. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much for this large panorama. Let me widen it even more. So put you some issues for discussion, and then we open the floor to a broader discussion. As I said at the beginning, I mean, it is nice to have you here because you have had a very rich career looking at things from many different perspectives, but with the in a sense the European spirit a bit transpiring throughout all the different experiences. Okay, DPRC. What is this? No, it is the typical decision-making of the European Union, which we had to confront. D is denial in front of a certain priority, which requires difficult choices. First reaction, don't look at that. So denial. Then P is panic. Things get out of hand immediately. So panic. So that leads to the R, which is reaction, strong reaction. Then what happens usually, also markets tend to react positively. And then, what was absolutely needed at a certain point looks, less of a priority. So the final letter is C, which is complacency. So we often do not finish projects. So we have experienced like banking union to capital markets union, other. So this is a bit of a curse of incompleteness that we have to face. Now, okay, the question that I put to you is, in terms of creating the political incentives, not to leave things half done. What should we do?